Right, so Chef Danger, what are you on about when you're talking about Kentucky style bourbon barrel baby back ribs? Let me explain. So by Kentucky style, what I'm referring to is this Kentucky straight bourbon, which I'm going to be using a couple of different times during my cook today. I'm a big fan of Maker's Mark. It's my favourite whiskey, which is why I'm using it. By bourbon barrel, what I'm referring to is this wood, which I'm going to be smoking with today. And I'll go into a bit more detail about this outside, about why this is special. But these are aged bourbon barrel barrels, which have been chopped down and I use them for smoking. I look forward to having a play with these. And by baby back ribs, I mean baby back ribs. Simple. So I'm going to do two different kinds of ribs today. This half I'm going to do with bourbon barbecue sauce, and this half I'm going to do with a whiskey apple caramel sauce. So the butcher's done all the work for me basically. I'm just going to run my hands down, double check and make sure I've not got any splinters of bone sticking out the side. And then all I'm going to do is just take my knife, get it underneath this membrane, lift it up a little bit, and then using a paper towel, lift the rest of it away, and in theory this should all just come off in one piece. Beautiful. And that's it. I don't need to do a whole hell of a lot more of these ribs. They're basically ready. Right, the rub I'm using today is super simple stuff. Just salt, black pepper, actually quite a bit of black pepper. Always grind your own pepper, guys. It makes a world of difference. And just a little bit of chili powder for depth and for colour as well. There we go, that'll do. Now, barbecue sauce, like anything in barbecue, has one secret ingredient, and that's time. Now, 2 days from now, I'm going to get these ribs out onto the smoker, but for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to do a super simple, super basic barbecue sauce. We're going to leave it from the fridge for a couple of days, just to mellow out. It's going to make those flavours really strong, really distinct, so when I'm slathering my ribs, and when I'm getting it all over my sides and stuff, it's going to taste banging. Cheers, guys. So into the pan, I'm going to drop a good 100 grams of butter, 1 onion. We're going to saute these onions in the butter until they soften a little bit. So the butter is going to emulsify this when we blitz it all together. So rather than using vegetable oil, the butter is going to create like a nice, shiny, silky, smooth finish, like a real barbecue sauce. And we're not going to cheat and use ketchup. We're going to do it all properly. We're going to add a good slug of whiskey. Let this alcohol evaporate off a little bit. Oh, it smells good on its own. Just going to use a bit of brown sugar, probably a couple of 100 grams. A good splash of apple cider vinegar, some Worcestershire sauce, Worcestershire sauce. Gonna add some tomato puree. That was about a quarter of a tube. Now we can see this is starting to come together already. It's starting to show its colour a little bit. Right, take this off the heat. Clean up the mess I've made. Right, we're just gonna press it through the sieve. Get all the bits out, and then we'll have a barbecue sauce. Homemade barbecue sauce. Nothing to it. Right, pan on medium heat. About 50 grams of butter. Let that melt. That was like 2 shots. I don't know. I'm not very good at hand pouring drinks. Just going to give this a chance for the alcohol to evaporate off. Obviously we want that nice boozy whiskey taste, but we don't want it to be alcoholic. We just want it to have that nice depth of flavour. Oh, don't breathe this. Whoa. And we're going to add in about 200 grams of sugar, there or thereabouts. Just going to add a splash of raw apple cider vinegar, just a couple of tablespoons, and then about half a jar of applesauce. And so at this point, we're just sort of letting this reduce down. Obviously, what we've got to do is we've got to have a taste. Oh my God. Oh, wow. So appley. Very nice. Right, I've got my coals in the smoker getting warm. Gonna get my whiskey oak preheated. And there we go. We'll come back in about 20 minutes when this is ready and we'll get the meat on. Right, so my fire's almost ready. I'm gonna get these rubbered up. Now, only gonna use just a little bit of rub. I don't need loads here. A lot of the flavor, like I say, is gonna come from the sauces that we're gonna be finishing with when we wrap them and finish them in the oven. But the salt, the pepper, the chili powder, it's just gonna add a little bit of depth, a little bit of flavor. I'm gonna get both sides rubbed. Some people argue that you just need to rub one side, and I guess you do just need to rub one side, but I'm gonna rub both sides. Now I rub the shining side first, where the ribs are facing outwards. I rub the shining side first, where the ribs are facing outwards, because that's the place where the majority of the flavour is not going to penetrate so deeply. But this meaty side, and I'm going to cook these meat side up, these are the part where I'm going to put the majority of the rub, the majority of the flavour is going to come through here. Press it in. I think these are ready for the fire. Normally I'd like to have a bit more airflow around these, around the outside, but as these constrict, it's going to let the air roll around. I'd rather have them away from the firebox, smoking up nice and cool, and I'll turn these when I'm cooking. Quite a peaceful way to spend an afternoon, really. Right, 1 hour in, we're going to have a little spritz. All I've got here is just a mix of water, apple cider vinegar and a little bit of that bourbon whiskey. Normally I'd use a spritz bottle, but I've left my spritz bottle in my brother's garage. Okay, cool. Yeah, 1 hour in, we're looking nice. So I'm starting to see a little bit of colour develop. I'm not getting too dark around the edges, which is what I'm checking for. Right, let's give it a little spritz. So I'm just going around the outsides just to make sure that these areas getting cooled a little bit. I don't want them getting too hot. That whiskey smells really strong. From the whiskey barrel, from the spritz, from everything. Lovely. Close it back up. We'll see it in another hour. Right, so I just quickly want to talk about fire management on this smoker. So all I'm doing is literally that. Give it a moment to catch. So there you go, that's it. That's my fire management for today. All I'm doing is just making sure that I've got my chunks burning down into embers, and then when they burn down into embers and stop producing a flame, I put a new chunk on. That's it. That's all I'm doing today. Now, if I was cooking a brisket or a pork shoulder or something big, I'd be more concerned with making sure that my temperatures are between 250 Fahrenheit and 275 Fahrenheit, which is when fat renders, and that's the temperature we normally cook to. But because all I'm doing is I'm just putting smoke and flavour over these ribs for 3 hours and then finishing them in the oven for 2 hours, I don't care. It doesn't matter. Like, this is one of the easiest things that we can cook on a smoker without a doubt. I don't care how hot my fire's running, just as long as it's running clean, as long as I've got wispy, vapour-like smoke that smells good, it's nice and clean, nice and fresh. That's it. If I can do it, you can do it. In fact, here, let me just labour this point. Firebox management again. Put my chunk on, let it catch, close it up, come over to my prep table, grab another chunk, preheat it in the back corner. That's it. So here's where we get a bit tricky. So we've got a bigger piece here, so we need to give it a little bit of a blow. There we go. This little piece must have been from something or other. Cool. Righty, so this is 2 hours in. Let's have a little look. Yes, nice. Nothing fleshy, nothing's burning. Lovely, lovely. Still got loads to give. Nice. Alright guys, we've still got a couple of hours to kill, so let's have a chat about wood. Now, let me get a little zoom in of here. This is my whiskey oak. Now, these will be whiskey barrels, which distillers will have used to age their whiskies in, imparting a woody taste into the whiskey, creating depth and flavour, and then when they decant the whiskey off and we enjoy it, you're left with a barrel, which we then break down and send to me, so that I can cook some barbecue with. Now, the reason why I mentioned the timing of this, so this wood probably about a year old. Now, the barrels that we use to age whiskey in, now at least 10 to 12 years, that's how old this wood will be, because that's about how long we season our whiskey for when it's in the whiskey barrels, there or thereabouts. This will have had maybe 0.1% moisture at the time of use, because they don't want any extra moisture getting in there, they don't want to contaminate the brew, but at the same time you don't want your wood to swell or expand as the moisture increases or decreases, or maybe cause cracks and allow it to split. And so this will have been kept in a very, very strict sort of environmental controlled environment. And so the whiskey gets decanted off, it gets enjoyed by those of us who enjoy nice whiskey, and then what we're left with are the barrels, which they break down and send out to smokers like me. Now, I got all my wood today from the guys at Smokewood Shack. They produce decent, high quality seasoned wood, the kind that I like to cook with. Now, this whiskey oak, because there's still trace whiskey in it, and you can smell it inside the wood very slightly, and especially when it burns, that whiskey flavour gets released, and it's currently being infusing into my meat, meaning in theory I should get some very nice whiskey tasting whiskey notes in my ribs. And so here we go. This is ribs after 3 hours. Yep, nice. I'm into those colours. They've still got flecks, they're not falling apart yet. A good couple of hours braising in some fluid and we'll get them nice and tender. They smell fabulous. Right, so ribs have been on the smoker for 3 hours, and so what I'm going to do before I get them wrapped, I just want to check and make sure my sauces are all good. Now, this caramel that I've made has had a chance to set. It's now nice and thick and saucy. Now, this barbecue sauce, which I made a couple of days ago, it's had a couple of days to sit in the fridge and relax. I brought it up to room temperature so that I'm not putting cold onto hot and getting lukewarm. Now, the caramel's good to go as it is, but my barbecue sauce is a little bit too thick, and I want to wrap my ribs in tin foil with these sauces to braise them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a good couple of tablespoons and mix it in with that whiskey, apple cider vinegar, water mixture that we were using to spritz before. There we go. So I'm going to braise these meat side down in barbecue sauce. There's enough fluid in here that it's going to get them nice and moist, and it's going to help them break down. Lovely. Okay, so it's dinner time, these ribs are ready, and we are ready to eat. Me and my friends are hungry. Now, both of these ribs turned out brilliantly. The apple whiskey caramel ribs turned out the whiskey was really strong in them, the sweetness cut right through the pork, they were really delicious and tender. The bourbon barbecue ribs had a really strong, distinct barbecue sauce flavour. That apple cider, that Worcestershire sauce, really gave a nice depth to the pork, and they both work really nicely. Now, I realise when I'm editing these videos together that actually you can't really tell the difference between the two ribs, because this one very much came down to taste, aroma, and texture. Now, if you don't have a smoker and you're interested in doing some barbecue ribs, you can do this exact same recipe inside your oven. And the barbecue sauce recipe, the whiskey apple caramel recipe, they work just fine on oven ribs. Obviously, if you get a chance to play with a smoker, that's where it's at its peak. But if anybody ever gets a chance to try this recipe, put a message down below. I'd love to hear what you guys think. And with that in mind, thanks very much for tuning in. I look forward to catching you guys next time. Adios.